Hey, this is Mike Matthews from muscleforlife.com. Thanks for stopping by. Welcome to the podcast. In this episode, I am going to be interviewing Dr. Richard Lee from GeneSolve. GeneSolve is a company that Kelly Starrett actually turned me on to when he was on the show. Sounded interesting, so I went and checked them out, and then I got real interested and contacted them to get Dr. Lee on the show and kind of talk about not just what GeneSolve does, but just genetics and how they affect our health and our ability to perform in general. So Dr. Lee received his MD from Michigan State University in 1988 following bachelor and graduate studies at Stanford. He was the first resident recipient of the Star Physician Award for Excellence in Patient Care from San Jose Medical Center, and he won an award in teaching excellence from Stanford Family Medicine in 2001. Through his entire 25-year medical history, he's always taken a special interest in body chemistry, and as you'll see, he knows his stuff, and he's a pretty cool dude. He was fun to interview. So I hope you like the podcast, and let's get to it. Okay, Dr. Lee, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast. I'm excited to have you because this is the work that you're doing is very interesting, and this is an area that I don't know that much about, so I look forward to learning something myself.
Well, hopefully I can teach you something and have fun at the same time.
Yeah, I think so. All right, so your mission at GeneSolve isn't just to help people improve their health, but more to help them kind of achieve the absolute best levels of health and performance possible, right? To kind of optimize the human body.
Yeah, that's the word we use a lot, and I think if there's one word to describe what we do, that would be it, optimizing. If we use an automotive metaphor, it's like performance tuning, which actually I used to do before medicine. And the whole idea is to get the most out of every human being that you possibly can without harming and without increasing the wear and tear, and having them last a whole lot longer because of it.
Yeah. I mean, that whole world is something just in general is very interesting to me because you have, obviously there are a lot of people that are looking to achieve that, and therefore with people willing to spend money and spend time, you have a lot of bullshit out there. You know, that all kinds of snake oil supplements and weird routines and weird diets and blah, blah, blah. But there actually is a legitimate science to improving the body, improving the performance of the body. And you'll see that a lot, obviously, like with, I email or social media with quite a few professional athletes, and it's always interesting to hear what kind of things they're doing because they need to, as you're saying, squeeze out. I mean, if they're looking to just improve some aspect of their performance by 3%, that can mean quite a bit when their livelihood is on the line. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you mention these athletes, they're looking at for one thing or another. And this is a problem. The science is very complex because it isn't just one thing or another. No physiologic system works in a vacuum or in isolation. So we try and simplify the solution, but we're still using very complex science to do it.
Yeah, you've probably read the book, The Sports Gene.
Not cover to cover, but yeah.
Oh, so you're familiar with it? Yeah, I'm gonna be having the author on the next podcast, and just that. I mean, you start delving into the genetics, and it gets so complex, as you're saying, and there are so many different variables to account for. So, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about kind of pinpointing, what you can do to improve people's health, improve their performance, and how do you do it?
Well, it's interesting because the first answer may be an unexpected one. We get a really good history. I mean, people are focused on all this quantified self and data and labs and measurements, and yes, we do that, but I'm a third-generation physician in my family. There's 7 doctors before me.
Wow.
And my grandfather was renowned for being an excellent diagnostician back in the days when you didn't have the tools. And he told me in my youth, you can get 90% of what's wrong with someone by getting a really good history, knowing to ask the right questions. So we start with that. In many ways, it doesn't matter what your lab is now if we don't know what you were before. We want to know what happened with you in the past. We want to know what you're feeling now. And that way we get a better idea of what systems are wrong. We use that history very carefully in a very elegant expert system. It's basically applying artificial intelligence to a complex set of answers to come up with a list of up to 38 different conditions that could be going wrong with you that if you went to your doctor, they say, you're normal, your labs are normal, there's nothing really that far out of whack, go away, you're just getting old.
Wow.
So starting with that history, we get a real jump start on what could be going wrong. We back it up with very specific labs. We're not shotgunning everything. We only use labs for items that we have that are actionable, that we can change, and for systems that we need to monitor. And in almost every case, the labs absolutely confirm everything we find in the historical diagnosis. On top of that, we throw in genomics. We don't do the entire genome, and we don't even do huge genotyping, because what we're interested in, again, are the genomics that we can do something about.
Right.
And your genes, they're like the blueprint of your house, but they don't tell you how well the house is built or who's repairing it. So it's not your genes, it's what you do with them, and we figured out what to do with that as well.
That's really fascinating. What kind of results do you see? Like what type of changes do people in performance or health biomarkers or even overall well-being? Or
well, that's probably one of the most satisfying things. And our marketing people, when they talk to patients, and they get a taste of what I had 20 years of getting a taste of, which people saying, I never thought I could feel that much better.
Wow.
Or I haven't felt this good in 20 years. Or I just can't believe I sleep better, I think better, my mind is sharper, my mood is better, I don't yell at my wife, I don't yell at my kids, I wake up in the morning with energy, I don't hurt so much, and when I do something physical, I'm getting away with going much better, much longer, much faster, with less pain, and feeling better the next day, whereas before I might be crushed. So
yeah,
whether it's
and what I think is so cool about that is, and this is actually funny enough, this is kind of an idea for a book that I want to write. It's been the ideas out there. It's been done in different ways, whenever. But that is what you're describing. Where while it sounds, it's definitely extraordinary. That's not the average person. That's not how they live. They don't live saying I wake up every day with a bunch of energy. I'm pain free. I always feel great. I'm mentally clear. But that's how I would say that's how things are actually supposed to be. If you can really give your body what it needs, and you can, eat the things you need to eat. You can supplement the way you need to supplement. You can exercise the way you need to exercise. And of course, there are other lifestyle factors that could come into play. But I think that's awesome, because I think that's what people should be striving for, not just yeah, right. That would be, it's like, as if that's like science fiction stuff that maybe in 100 years we'll ever be able to experience.
It's fun because it's here now, and you mentioned all the things that people are supposed to do right: eat right, exercise right. Notice a lot of people don't talk about sleeping right. So many other things, and the issue there is, again, going back to the history, is what kind of damage have you done? If you're doing anything right now, that's fine. But in your car, did you rip out the undercarriage and not know it? You may be fueling it right and driving it right, but are the tires worn? Is a clutch slipping? Those things in a physical metaphor are what we find from the history in the labs that go well beyond what you can get from just sort of looking at the surface.
That's interesting. And could you give me an example? I'm just curious. Like, what's an example of something that you would find in someone's history that they've done that has caused, damage that needs to be repaired, and then how do you actually go about doing that? I'm just curious.
Okay, great question. Well, I don't know anyone who lives a stress-free life or who leaves a trauma-free life. And those things accumulate. Little traumas, big traumas. It could be a car crash. It could be a divorce. It could be working under a boss who's a workplace bully. Any and all those things. The first thing is stress. We've learned to historically quantify it. From that builds a diagnosis. And then we look at the markers of that. Number one, in most cases, is the stress hormone cortisol. We measure it not only once, but 4 times a day, because it has a different pattern. Cortisol does it can do some good things for energy, but it does so many bad things. It raises blood sugar. It beats down serotonin, which leads to depression. It steals from your sex hormones. You won't make them if your body's creating cortisol, and it all comes from your cholesterol. So the stress hormone and the stress response has a huge cascade effect on your entire neurologic system and on your entire endocrine system. And if you don't measure it, you don't know how to fix it. And if you don't fix it, you'll never get what you want out of your body.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's actually something I wanted to ask after the podcast. My wife has run into problems with that because our son just doesn't sleep. I mean, she takes care of him at night. I'm up early and I'm working all day. She takes care of him, and he wakes her up a lot at night. And because she hasn't been sleeping really correctly for a long time, like she actually just recently got blood tested and her cortisol levels are too high. And then it was the exact same, the doctor that we're seeing is a pretty smart guy, and he also does a whole like history analysis thing, not the same as yours, but he does go about it that way, almost like a Hippocratic type of method. But so anyways, I see firsthand what that can do if cortisol levels get out of whack and you just have, chronic high cortisol levels, just really messes with the body.
Yeah, and then we've also got, I mean, that's the whole, the sex hormone and adrenal system. We've also got the thyroids to deal with. There are, most people have at one time in their life a dysfunction in their thyroid. It only gets worse with age. And you need to treat that. You can't treat it in a vacuum. You have to treat it with the adrenals. Thyroid and vitamin D. This is a vitamin. Both of these, if they're off, they'll affect the production and the regulation of your sex hormones. Oftentimes, if you correct those, you can bring someone out of a low testosterone or low estrogen state if you understand how they affect that. So, these are just a few examples. We haven't even got into neurotransmitters or what the gut does and doesn't do. But you get the idea that they're all out there and they all affect each other. So you have to understand those relationships to make both the diagnosis and to correct it.
Yeah, totally makes sense. So let's talk about eating foods, right? So everybody kind of knows that eating a bunch of nutritious foods and exercising also, we can talk about that, you just got to lump it in here, are the foundations of good health, but you kind of go a step further by really diving into each individual's chemistry and how to change those things to fit each person's body's needs. How does that work exactly?
Okay, well, on the diet side, we'll start with, first of all, we find out through the questionnaire, do they have any food sensitivities or inflammatory reactions to foods that they're not paying attention to? We'll make a diet correction for that. We also include in the genomics the best available tests to determine if there's a specific diet type that their metabolism would work better with.
Could you give me an example of that?
I'm sorry, what?
Could you give me an example of that? Like how? Like what are some of the variations that you see?
Okay, we test routinely for 4 variations of diet. One is the person who's lucky who can eat almost anything in terms of good quality.
Yeah.
Others that need to be, and a majority of them need to be on a lower carb diet. Some do well on a Mediterranean diet, which is similar to that but has some differences.
Right.
And others, very few people do well on a low fat diet. You've got some people are just born Eskimo. It's all fat in their diet, and they do well on that. And some are born, islanders, where it's all fruits and grains, although that's more of a rarity. So
right.
There are genomic markers for that. Also, there are genomic markers that will tell us if they have certain enzyme deficiencies for getting rid of toxins or building neurotransmitters. And we check for those, and we also check the products of those enzymes and adjust accordingly. So that's just the diet side of it. Obviously, we have people who are heading towards diabetes and don't know it. We fix that. And I haven't found a person yet who wasn't in need of more vitamin D.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote an article recently about vitamin D. I'm always talking about vitamin D.
But we're just not running around naked in the sun enough.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, that's what it boils down to. I mean, here I'm in Florida, so I think when I was writing the article, just doing the research, it kind of would boil down to if I were to expose about, I think it was 75 or 80% of my body to the Florida sun in the summer for, I think it was about 20 to 25 minutes a day, then I'd probably be fine. But, I don't know. I'm not going to go out tanning. I'd rather just supplement, and that's, that's the majority of people obviously are deficient because they don't supplement and they don't get in the sun enough, and that's it. There's no other way.
Yeah, and now we're worried about, also, we're worried about skin cancer, and maybe the ultraviolet light consistency has changed in our exposure as well. So you were safer to go out and run around naked 1,000 years ago than you are now.
That's an interesting point. Quickly, I wanted to say something about this on low carb. So do you find, because in my, there's looking at the literature and then just working with people, I find that if a person, because carbs are primarily energetic, if you don't move your body, if you're not exercising much, especially if you're not training your muscles, which, obviously just through the storage of glycogen, I mean, that's a big carb sink a bit, and that's a big major use for the body is the muscles doing things. Where I find that people that are weightlifting frequently and probably doing cardio as well, just the type of people that I generally work with and email with, tend to do better on a higher carbohydrate diet. And that's quantified by, or how maybe it's more just a qualitative thing, like in terms of what they say is better. And I've had quite a few people come to me on a low carb diet where they found that they felt okay throughout the day, but their workouts suffered. And when they switched to a higher carbohydrate diet, and once again, I'm also a big proponent of getting the majority of your calories from nutritious foods. Just because you can eat junk food and maintain a low percent of body fat doesn't mean you should do it. There are other things to take into account. That they find when they switch from a low carb to a high carb diet that their strength dramatically improves. That they find it much easier to build muscle. They find if they're dieting to lose weight, they find that it provides more satiety. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Well, these are, again, you're dealing with active athletes, and in that case, it is true because they are burning that fuel. And you can't. You can only burn fat at a certain rate, and you need carbs as a substrate to burn fat anyway.
Right.
Protein is mainly there to sort of buffer the whole carb intake into your body. It's mainly there to buffer the insulin response.
Right.
And these people, the majority of them, have really good insulin responses anyway. So for a sedentary person, most of them are going to do better with a low carb diet. But
Yes.
for an athlete, you got to, if the muscle doesn't get fuel, it isn't going to work. It isn't going to grow. So yeah, in essence, yes, for that subset, which is probably most of the people who are listening to you, the main thing is to keep the quality of those carbs as good as possible and be mindful of the fact that there may be foods that you don't tolerate as well that you don't know until you stop them or replace them.
Right, yeah, totally. That's exactly what I've found, and what I've always recommended is if for sedentary people, how many carbs do you really need if you're not exercising? I mean, 50, maybe 60 grams a day, and you could really just get it from vegetables, probably.
Well, ideally, you may need some brown starches, brown carbs, basically. Just avoid the white ones. I don't think gluten's the cause of every problem from communism to cancer, but a lot of people have an issue with it that they're unaware of, while other people think they do when they don't.
Yeah, so, I wrote about that recently, where a lot of it, you probably saw that study that just came out recently that basically what people were reacting to were the FODMAPs, the fermentable oligosaccharide. I forget the acronym, but it wasn't the gluten per se. It was a certain type of carbohydrate that the body couldn't deal with, and you'll find that in wheat, but you'll find that in a lot of other sources as well. Like legumes and other things. And when they cut out all that stuff, then their irritable bowel symptoms went away.
Right. But then it's a lot harder for them to find food they can eat anywhere at any time.
Yeah, I know. I mean, that's I've emailed with some people that ran into that issue, and I forwarded them along to the article, and it was a pain for them to kind of work out their meal plan, but they were having enough problems where it was like they had to do something, and by cutting out all those types of carbs, it calm their digestive system down. And I don't know if you've seen this, but I've seen this, that where if somebody their gut is all inflamed and they do find what their body's reacting to, and they get rid of a lot of that stuff, and everything chills out, and they're able to slowly introduce things back in without any problems.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've seen it measuring antibody levels in true celiac disease. The farther from exposure, the more it drops. In fact, some people who have celiac disease, been gluten-free, maybe just out of luck all their life, would have low antibodies and be missed, except when they eat a loaf of bread, they're obviously screwed, or pizza and beer. Yeah. So, and the other thing we have to think about is not just what you eat, is what are you feeding? We're just touching the tip of the whole system, the metabiome, all those critters in your gut. And when you travel, they change. When you take antibiotics, they change. God knows, for whatever reason, they change. And we're trying to learn, one, to identify those. We're not there yet, but we're watching that. And two, how do you correct for that? Those little critters can increase uptake of certain foods. They can pass excess carbs that you normally wouldn't absorb right through your gut, and that may be the cause of some people's obesity. They can also upregulate neurotransmitters, not just GABA, which reduces anxiety, but also serotonin. So we're looking at that. We don't have a way to fix it yet, but we're aware and hoping to come up with something. So
yeah, that's very interesting. All right, so that's on the dietary side. What about exercise? What kind of things do you find?
Okay. Again, on exercise, we do a genomic assay to determine, first of all, would they benefit more as a rule from strength training or endurance training? Some people benefit more from both. Most of those tests, however, are based on population data that looks at things like blood sugar response to exercise and lipid response to exercise.
Right.
Not as much as athletic performance with response to exercise. So we're still working on that one.
Sure.
But at the same time, your body will tend to do better what it does, especially if you get some guidance from a trainer. You'll find out that you hurt yourself if you work too hard at the wrong thing. What we also look at is what's behind, what's the whole endocrine system behind that? Is everything finely tuned to preserve and maintain all nerve and muscle and bone and your brain at the same time? So that's what we're looking at.
Yeah, that's super interesting. What kind of things do you find? You find that some people's bodies, like, they're gonna, health-wise, they're just gonna benefit more from weightlifting than cardio, or vice versa?
Yes, and generally, if someone's really active, they'll discover that on their own.
Yeah.
For our patients who are more sedentary,
Right.
it helps us guide them into not wasting time on things.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, my general recommendation is, like, of course, you have the maintenance of lean mass. If we're just looking at health, as you age is extremely important. Of course, as you know, that's, all-cause mortality is just correlated to, like, the more muscle you lose, the more likely you are to die of something one day.
Right.
So maintaining muscle is important, and then doing cardio as well for obviously cardiovascular health. And I mean, I've always just kind of done a bit of both. Like, I like to lift weights. Been doing it for a long time, but I also enjoy cardio. And it seems, I guess it kind of comes back to when you do enough stuff with your body, you can know things. You can get an idea of, well, it just seems like my body tends to do this or feels better when I'm doing that. And then I'm sure, it could be then actually quantified and measured with something like what you're doing.
Yeah, and again, most of the people who are probably listening to this are fairly athletic, and know by now, or a trainer or someone who's observing them and their exercise would have a good idea at that point. And that's their skill and observation. They're looking at measuring down the drag strip around the course. We're actually looking under the hood.
Yeah, I like that metaphor. So based on your experience, what are some of the most common things that you see that kind of prevent people from reaching optimal levels of health and performance? Okay.
Well, we'll start with, again, going back to history, traumas, past and present. What were they subject to? One thing that's really affects a lot of people is brain trauma. Even if they haven't been seriously hospitalized for it, concussions can, in very subtle ways, bruise the pituitary gland, and all the endocrine systems downstream from that will not be stimulated or told to work as hard as they should. So that history sets a pattern to watch out for. The stress level they're on will tell me how much their cortisol is going to be affected by this. Is it going to be too high, or do they have their adrenals already burned out? Or are they only burned out in the morning when you need them the most? So their sleep patterns will tell me about their adrenal issues as well. And that's all. And then what they eat gives us a hint what they crave, what makes them feel good or bad. That's the start. And then we look at all the other neuroendocrine balances. We're talking about the vitamins, like I said, vitamin D. We look at proteins that are pre-hormones, DHEAS. We look downstream into estrogen, testosterone, progesterone. We look at the proteins that hold those hormones hostage. Sex hormone binding globulin, often raised by stress or raised by someone who's taking an external hormone and not doing it in the right way.
Right.
Yeah. So, and we're finding all those can be off.
Interesting. And what would you say, like, you mentioned sleep a few times. Do you find that a lot of people are not sleeping correctly or not sleeping enough, or is that like a common thing you run into?
Yeah, I mean, you talk to a lot of people and they'll just say, "Oh, well, I'll sleep when I'm dead." Well, that may happen sooner than you think, or you'll be a zombie before then. You don't even have to die. There are a couple things. One is everyone is just trying to cram too much of what they need to do and things they don't need to do into a day. there's some benefits to the internet, but it's really screwing with people's sleep.
Yeah.
And the biggest culprit there is that blue screen that's staring back at you. And it doesn't matter if it's a 50-inch plasma or a 3-inch smartphone.
Yep.
That blue glow goes to your brain. It says it's daylight. You don't go to sleep until 2 hours after that. Or even if you do knock out, your REM sleep won't start until sometime later. So
yeah, because it messes with melatonin, right?
Yeah, it messes. Well, it goes more than that. It goes through a little part of the brain called the suprachiasmatic nucleus, which regulates melatonin. But even melatonin can't overdrive that day-night cycle if you've got it too burned into your brain. It helps. And then again, your growth hormone only works in those first REM cycles.
Right.
Your brain recycles and makes serotonin during sleep. Your immune system will only communicate more effectively when you're sleeping. All those T cells get together like a bunch of special ops guys, and they set who's a target and who's not to be damaged. And if they don't get those communications, they don't go after the right targets, and you get sick more often, and they damage the wrong ones, you get more inflammatory disease.
Wow.
All that happens when you sleep right.
And for sleeping right, I mean, is that just kind of the standard 7 to 9 hours? And is there anything else? Any other like mistakes, interesting things that get in the way of good sleep?
Geez, well, I don't know if I've had 7 hours in the last 20 years, but anyway, it really is. It's not just the quantity of sleep; it's the quality of sleep.
Huh.
The things, their history will tell us. We don't treat medical problems, so we're not throwing Ambien or Lunesta at these people. They may come to us on that, but what we will do is we'll find that we can bring down the high evening cortisol that creates the monkey mind. We can turn on increased production of their brain's GABA, so that it also shuts down the monkey mind and the anxiety, and just puts them in a restful state through their own neurotransmitters rather than something we're doing to try and manipulate them.
Right. And so if a person is in a better state in terms of neurotransmitters, then you're saying that the quality of the sleep is going to be higher and they won't necessarily need as much as somebody else?
Correct. It's a matter of quality and quantity. Now, everyone's different, but in our question, we ask questions to determine if someone actually has sleep apnea or a non-REM or non-apnea sleep disorder. And you have older women athletes. Once their ovaries are starting to go into retirement, we tell them they're all heading south to Florida. What happens? Yeah, they're looking at those condo brochures. The estrogens start to drop, and it's very important for sleep. A common problem that's never addressed in pre and postmenopausal women with insomnia is it's due to low functioning estrogen. And because we're all outliving our gonads. Unfortunately, women live much longer than without theirs than we do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's I didn't know that actually. I didn't know that.
Oh,
there's a correlation there with estrogen. And you had mentioned cravings now. Just because I'm curious about that, because it's something that is on my list of things to research. I get asked about it. What can you tell us about how cravings for various types of foods, like, does it mean anything? I've heard so many things. Yes. I don't even know what to think. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it does. In fact, yesterday I did a long Skype video interview on that, and craving starts at many different levels. First of all, our bodies have not evolved that much past the Neanderthal or cave person stage. Mm-hmm. We are still bred and predisposed to craving salt and fat and to some degree sugar.
Right.
Salt and fat being the most rare and the most desired and the most needed when you're trolling the earth trying to hunt and gather what you need to eat.
Right.
But now it's in abundance. It's everywhere, particularly in the junk foods. And then they've added in the sweeteners, mainly high fructose corn sweetener and other carbs that speak to that reptilian brain in us and make us eat more and more of that crap that we don't need to. We're staying up later, and our food, we're usually up past time that a good restaurant is open,
right.
And we don't like to cook, so we go for something that's quick, and that's going to be something that's going to be stable on the shelf or stable in the can for a longer period of time, right. And more processed, and has more of these little things that are intended to help our brains eat more of them. So one, we haven't evolved as much as we think we have. Two, the food has evolved much faster, and it's become much more poor in quality of nutrition. And they're being sold and actually put together, if you will, or manufactured in a way that we'll crave things more and more based on those preferences from 10,000 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense from a business standpoint if you have no scruples. I mean, you need people addicted to your stuff and you need them buying it, as much as possible. So figure it out.
So we got that. Then you've got the issue of people will have cravings to try and feed something. Smokers want more dopamine in their brain, and nicotine turns that on. There are also foods that do that. A lot of people, when they crave carbohydrates, it will briefly upregulate serotonin in the brain. I said briefly.
Right.
Serotonin is a chemical that provides calm, order, and hope to the brain. The problem is when they keep taking those carbs or sweets to spike the serotonin, cortisol starts to rise. The blood sugar goes on a roller coaster, and after a while, the cortisol actually poisons serotonin through another neurotransmitter called glutamate. Not too far from monosodium glutamate, but this is inside the brain. So they're trying to feed their serotonin by little bits of sugar. They're trying to feed dopamine by again, fats or certain sugars. And they'll crave things their body needs. One example that surprised me, in 1991, I was a physician for the National Geographic Everest expedition, and our chief scientist has always been a vegetarian, yet in the dining tent, he was just scarfing down smoked salmon that was there, and wasn't even aware of it. He was just picking at it and talking, and we brought that to his attention, and very smart guy, and he realized what he was craving was omega-3 fatty acids.
Right.
And you're not going to get that from lentils and rice, which is the main Sherpa fare there. And he needed that to preserve his blood-brain barrier so he wouldn't get cerebral edema at altitude.
Right.
So we do crave things. The problem is the foods that we should crave are being hijacked by the other cravings, the cravings for sweets and crunchy, salty, fatty things.
Yeah, and that's interesting because my experience, I eat I eat very well. I eat probably I'd say 3 or 4 servings of vegetables a day, and I kind of mix them up. And I eat a little bit of sugar here and there. Maybe it's like some chocolate or something like that. A high protein diet. I've been doing this for a long time. I don't eat any I eat mainly organic foods, which is a whole other subject. I actually need to write an article on it. But and my primary reason for that is because, a new study just came out. I just saw it just the other day. It was organic produce, and I think it was whole grains. And the produce and whole grains had a bit more, the organic had a bit more nutrients and a bit less heavy metals and other toxins. And I don't eat any fast food. So I have a pretty clean diet. And I never crave. I'll go out once a week. If I'm going to go to a restaurant, I'll probably eat a dessert, and it's going to be sugary, and it's going to be good, and that's it.
Hopefully it's chocolate.
I am pretty into chocolate, but what I'll do is I'll beat if I'm doing one meal a week where I'm just going to kind of eat whatever, and then if I do something chocolatey, 6 weeks in a row, then I'm going to change it up. But so my if I were to say I have any sort of craving, which I don't even know if I'd really call it a craving, but I look forward to healthy, nutritious foods. When I think about that is appetizing to me. When I think about, right now, if I'm getting a little bit hungry, I think about eating a candy bar. It doesn't even, I would much rather go home and make my dinner with potatoes and vegetables and chicken. That is good to me. So is that I guess that's more how it's supposed to be?
That's how it's supposed to be. You may be lucky that your sleep is pretty good, that you manage your stress fairly well. And, again, even if you eat well, if the stress goes up, what happens is cortisol rises, and it can actually it can increase what we call the glycemic roller coaster, the blood sugar going up and down to greater swings.
Right.
And that's where people who even the Dalai Lama, given enough stress in his life, could end up going for a Twinkie now and then. Highly unlikely. So, but anyway, so. Yeah, you're lucky in that respect. The problem is there's no meal that you can pull out of a machine or pull out of your backpack or your glove box that's going to be that good for you that quick. And that's the tough part of. And most people don't have time to even eat real meals. How many people eat breakfast?
Yeah, it's I deal with this a lot because just in working with people, emailing with people, and what seems to work best is people, they get into the habit of just preparing larger batches of food once or twice a week. And so then they always have stuff, they bring it to the office, and then instead of going for chips, they have some other sort of snack that they've made. A lot of people, they start getting creative with it. They start having fun. They'll make homemade protein bars or
Wow.
You know, there's a lot of
that much time.
yeah. I mean, well, it's like, whatever. You throw it all together, you throw it in the oven. Or even stuff like, I mean, like snack foods where instead of eating whatever, you could have some Greek yogurt and some fruit and some nuts or things that you can come to like. I mean, I think there was a guy, I forget, he wrote a book called The Man Who Ate Everything or Everything, I think it was. And basically he made a list of like his top 30 foods that he hated and like disgusting shit. So stuff that who eats this stuff, right? And when it was like he planned out his entire year where he had to eat everything, I think it was 8 times or whatever. And by the end of it, he found that he actually came to enjoy, it was like it wasn't all, but it was a lot of the foods that he hated before. And just by eating it over and over, he just started to like it. So I've found that people that go from a diet full of processed foods and the type of stuff you're talking about, where that's just what they're used to eating, the transition to a healthier diet can be kind of jarring to their palates in the beginning, but then if they just stick to it, they start to the body. I don't know. It's like their taste buds just change, and then all of a sudden they think all this food tastes great, and they don't really, maybe they have some junk food here and there, but it's not anything like how it used to be, where they would crave it and they hated vegetables and whatever. Yeah,
no, they do. It does get better, and basically, it upregulates like you said, their taste buds. They don't need as much sugar to taste sweet. They don't need any sugar. They don't need to salt the hell out of everything.
Yeah,
and they'll recognize the subtleties of what's in there. So on that side of it, it's true. Without going too long into it, you mentioned organic. The big problem there is organophosphate pesticides. If you look at any area in the nation where agriculture is very intense and where winds and tend to accumulate the dust from agriculture, you'll find the higher degrees of neurodegenerative diseases, including Parkinson's and whatnot. So,
and that's kind of tying into like what glyphosate and stuff like that.
Yeah,
yeah,
organophosphates, and there's a real problem with those.
Yeah. So one other thing you had mentioned was hormone imbalances. This is obviously a very hot subject these days. Testosterone clinics are like the latest, greatest thing, and everyone is on TRT. And, I know people that are in their 20s, early 20s, that find, they just want to be on, like a friend of mine. He recently, he didn't talk to me about it because he probably knew what I would tell him, but he recently randomly just came up with the idea that he just wants to get on T because he's not building muscle fast enough or whatever. So he goes to the doctor, he gets tested. His T was at, I think it was like 700 to 800 NGDL.
That's fine.
Exactly.
What's his problem?
Exactly. Totally fine. I think he's 25-ish or something like that, 26 maybe. And but it was just some shady clinic, shady doctor, and there was some like, but his one of his, maybe it was his sex hormone, there was some little hormone that was a little bit too high, and then the doctor was like, oh yeah, sure, here you go. So now he's on testosterone. Right. And so with that being just like a big button these days, what are some of the things that what are some of the I don't know if I'd say mistakes, but some of the things that are causing that, and that maybe people could do that could naturally help balance their hormones?
Okay, well, first, everyone's so fixated on testosterone. Yeah. Again, going back to mechanic days, it's never just that. And if your car's running lousy, if your engine's out of tune, if you're using crappy fuel and you're driving like an idiot, it doesn't make sense to throw a bigger turbocharger on it on its own. And that's kind of what the T thing is all about. So everyone's looking for the quick fix, the one thing they can just do and make all the difference. But again, it isn't just testosterone. If the testosterone is truly low, it is a symptom or a marker for a whole neuroendocrine system that's out of whack.
Right.
And so typically for most people, it's because their stress is high. They're stealing from their sex hormones to make cortisol as a stress hormone. Cholesterol is the starting point. It's the mother of all hormones. It goes downstream to DHEA. You could have a low DHEA because it's all going to cortisol, or your DHEA could be high because your nuts aren't turning it into testosterone.
Right.
And the question is to ask why. Well, it could simply be that you're low in vitamin D. That acts like FSH. It acts like a stimulant to your gonads to make all the sex hormones, whether you're male or female. Ditto with thyroid. If that's off, it isn't going to rise. So if you correct all the nuanced things around that, lower the cortisol, it needs to be lowered, replace the DHEA or find out why it's being stolen from, or if it's adequate, find out what is not telling your gonads to make the hormones, correct all those things, and your body will make the difference. We've done subtle corrections in thyroid, vitamin D, and DHEA only in a cyclist. His testosterone went from 540 to 910.
Wow.
Yeah, no testosterone and nothing.
He's
way out
happy. That's
yeah.
I'm sure that's a big change in terms of how he feels and how he performs.
So the thing is to ask before you start just throwing on testosterone, maybe step back and say, well, why is it off?
Yeah.
Okay. And then is it truly off? I have a hard time believing anyone with a testosterone in the 700s, their sex hormone binding globulin would have to be through the roof to bring it down.
Yeah.
At the same time, you could go into your doctor and have a testosterone that's 500. And by the way, insurance companies will usually pay for testosterone if it's lower than 300. The endocrinologist would like at least 400. But you could have a testosterone. I've had patients with testosterone in 540, but because that protein, sex hormone binding globulin, was so high, it brought their free testosterone down to about 4. And the normal range is 9 to 30. Wow. These are all in nanograms per deciliter. So if you never measure sex hormone binding globulin, you won't get the accurate measure of the testosterone. And we can lower sex hormone binding globulin, not by drugs, but by a couple supplements.
Interesting. Like what?
Well, probably the one with the strength of association isn't huge. The one that seems to have evidence is the extract of stinging nettle, which also tends to work for food sensitivities. Also, some authors say, I'm still looking for real good proof, but we found it anecdotally, is by taking a supplement called phosphatidylserine.
I've heard of that,
phosphatidylserine does lower evening cortisol. And by doing that, it may indirectly take away the theft of cortisol and push it back down towards testosterone. So we know it does that. We definitely know it improves memory. There's very strong evidence of that in randomized clinical trials. So those are the two things we do, but we also try and change people's sleep and behavior patterns so they aren't stealing from their hormones so much in the first place.
Right. That makes sense.
So that's how we deal with sex hormone binding globulin. And a lot of people, we've had refugees from some of these clinics where all they're getting is growth hormone and testosterone in injections.
Yep.
And that you're getting hormone spikes all the time. And we find their thyroids are out of whack. Their adrenals are actually trashed. And they're only getting half the benefit they would with a testosterone is 150% over the upper limit of normal. So, more isn't always better. There's a degree of awesomeness, and when you go beyond that in testosterone level, you start feeling worse again and really end up being stupid and sick.
Yeah, I mean,
So
I know in the bodybuilding community, of course, because there's all kinds of drug abuse that goes on. That's a known thing that when you really start blasting your T, your immune system goes to shit. Your body, you just don't feel very good. But then they're on so many other drugs in some cases too. It's a mess.
But that's their addiction, and
it's a psychological thing. I mean, I talk to guys that they don't care. They talk about it and they're all the different type of drugs they're on. And one for one, they just talk about that they wish they never started because now life off of drugs is it doesn't how they feel when they're on the drugs. They feel invincible, and then now they can't enjoy life without the drugs, and that sucks.
Yeah. How many bodybuilders do you know aside from Jack LaLanne that ever made it to 80?
Yeah.
Okay,
all you hear about are guys that their hearts explode or their livers fail or their kidneys fail.
Yeah, and so you might write an article about a business model for an addiction clinic for bodybuilders as opposed to drug or alcohol addiction or what have you, or eating disorder.
Yeah. There's a business I don't want to get into.
Yeah. All right. More questions. What can I answer for you?
Well, actually, we're running on just about 40, 50 minutes here. Whenever I go too long, people go, oh, you got to keep it shorter. So I think this is a good point to just wrap up. So if somebody wants to get a full rundown of their health from your company, from GeneSolve, how does that work? What's the process? Okay,
they sign up and they get an initial evaluation. And
but is it in person? They have to come to you, or?
Yeah, they have to see They have to see a healthcare professional, one of our doctors.
Okay.
Currently, we have them in California and Texas.
Okay.
I mean, we have people coming from as far away as New York. We haven't anyone come from Europe yet.
Yeah, I want to come. This sounds awesome.
Sure. Well, the best way is to come in because we are making diagnoses, real diagnoses. You can't do that without a health professional. and they have to look at you. Some states we can Skype that,
Yeah.
others we can't. So, and you've got to get an eye on the person anyway. You get a much better sense of what's going on with them. So, we hope to expand to the point where we're in as many states as people want to have us.
Yeah.
We're early on in that, but so they come to see us. They actually fill out this questionnaire that feeds into the expert system. We get labs, we get the genomics, and then we sit down with them and we do a brief exam. Most of these people are pretty darn healthy. And then we tell them what's wrong with them, and then we come up with a tailored plan as to what to fix.
That's great. And who is this for? I mean, it sounds like it's for not just people with problems, but people that, they could be healthy, they can be athletes, whatever, and they just want to get more out of their bodies.
Well, yeah, it's like I said, we don't treat disease. We're actually preventing it by doing this, but it's anyone who values it. They have to understand what we're doing. They have to be committed to making what lifestyle changes they can. They have to be compliant with what supplement programs we give them, and if they're on any pharmaceuticals, what we're doing for them.
Right.
So they have to have a mental commitment to it. And if they do, they're going to see results. So it's anyone who can make it through the door. We're not going to cure all the other stuff. We generally do not treat people with active cancer. That limits what we can do.
Right.
We did take an 11-year-old, and we were helping him out in very subtle things. And our oldest is 75. So it's really a matter of do you want more, and can we provide that for you in a lasting and quality way?
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, with the type of changes that you were talking about just from the beginning of the podcast, it goes much beyond being able to, squat an extra 50 pounds or something like that.
Oh, hell yeah. It's to live an extra 50 years and have fun every day in as little pain and as much communication and excitement and engagement as possible.
Yeah, well, who doesn't want that? You can't. There's the one-line pitch for it. That's great. Okay, cool. Well, thanks a lot for all the information, Dr. Lee. This was awesome. I learned a lot. I think the listeners are going to like it a lot. And genesolve.com, right? GENEsolve.com.
It's GENE-SOLVE, gene-solve.com.
Okay, or just Google GeneSolve and you're going to find it. I think it's great what you're doing. I think that this is definitely the where I think the almost just medical profession needs to go, where you're integrating. It's not just, here are drugs. As you're saying, here's some blood work. I don't know, things look fine, or your T's a little bit low. Here's a prescription. Have fun, kind of thing.
Yeah, we want to fix it all at the same time in the right proportions, and when you do, it makes a difference. If we could get this to the whole public, we'd save billions, if not trillions, in healthcare costs that we don't need to spend.
Yeah, totally. All right, well, thanks again, and this was super interesting.
My pleasure, anytime.